For decades, the U.S. relationship with Zambia was one centered on aid. The United States has provided billions of dollars of assistance to Zambia, helping the country reach HIV epidemic control, contributing to a 20-year extension and increase in life expectancy, slashing malaria deaths, and truly impacting positively the lives of every Zambian alive today.
Can Zambia afford to fund its own health? In Zambia, you have basically the United States relationship with Zambia is reaching a sort of turning point, for lack of a better term. The United States ambassador is leaving, which happens to is leaving on the 30th of April, which happens to also coincide with, and he made that farewell speech on the 30th of April, 2026, which happens to coincide with the date that has been leaked in a memo from the State Department as to when the negotiations for an MOU that, a draft MOU, that's what's publicly available, and that's what everyone is talking about when it comes to the U.S. health for minerals type of deal when it comes to Zambia. So the deadline on the leaked memo from the State Department is the 30th of April. The deadline in the draft MOU that was supposed to be signed actually in November 2025 put 1st April. But the ambassador in the speech actually talked about the 30th of April. So perhaps that is actually the revised deadline to allow for maybe put a bit more pressure on the government to come to a decision, but no decision has been made. No MOU has been signed. No agreement has been done. So what is the deal in and of itself? Basically, the deal involves $1 billion US, right? The United States proposes $1 billion in exchange for, as Nathan said, various data sharing, integration, sharing of potential patterns on pathogens, and in exchange, so Zambia gets data in exchange for $1 billion in health from 2026 to 2030 at a reducing amount over time. So that figure ranges from about $300 million down to about $100 million by 2030. And conversely, Zambia's contribution, sort of a co-funding type of model, Zambia's contribution increases over time. And it to be $4 billion. So United States is saying they will pay $1 billion for this period of time, for 2026, 2030. Meanwhile, Zambia will increase and scale up to $4 billion. And for a long period of time, Nathan mentioned the presidential emergency, I forgot the full name of the acronym, but it's called PEP.
Yeah. So, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. Yeah.
Yes. So that is PEPFAR. And it was started actually under George Bush in 2003. The idea was to place heavy funding on the US side to avoid affordable, actually free HIV and AIDS treatment, which was a very debilitating disease in Africa, not only to people, but to the economies of Southern Africa, especially. So 1.2 to 1.3 million people in Zambia are on HIV and AIDS treatment. That's about 10% of the population, the adult population of Zambia. And just to give you an idea of how it was before, right, when PEPFAR was in its heyday era, so 6.7 to $7 billion US has been spent in Zambia's HIV response since 2003. So annual support ranged around $600 million US per year in Zambia, and major progress has actually been made. Many millions of lives have been saved. There's this thing called 90-90-90. So 90% of people know, 90% of people with HIV and AIDS know their status. 90% of them are on treatment, 90% are on successful treatment, which we had an actual activist on HIV and AIDS from Botswana who actually stressed that HIV and AIDS is, after all of this progress, is no longer the death sentence it used to be because of successful treatment and lack of transmission to kids and to sexual partners. So the treatment, however, only works when funding systems actually continue and are available. So access to various medicines and testing and so on. But this healthcare package is not only HIV and AIDS, it's also malaria and tuberculosis, which are very serious diseases in parts of Africa, and in this case, Zambia in particular. So in addition to that, there's also a health workforce expansion, and then also offering of digital systems, but of course, as I mentioned, in exchange for the data sharing. So Zambia, obviously, we expect to contribute 4 times more than the United States. But the main sticking point here is, of course, the data sharing aspect, issues of privacy. Linda Kasonde and her LCK chambers, as well as other legal voices, critics who we have also had on our platform, on our podcast, have actually had forums and have taken that deal, that memorandum of understanding, the draft one that has not been signed yet, have taken it to court and challenged issues like data privacy and whether or not it goes against the human rights of Zambian people. And it was leaked in a government official in the Ministry of Health, not to be named, by the New York Times, actually said that it goes against Zambia's interests. So that is the real reason why it was paused. Although officially you will not see any comments about it. The foreign ministry is very tight-lipped, very official, very conciliatory. But the other aspect of this, aside from the data sharing, is also the bilateral compact. So in Chapter 6 of the draft MOU between the United States of America and Zambia, which was, as I said, which was supposed to be signed and has not been signed, was this bilateral compact. Bilateral compact is not publicly known. It's quite secretive. No one really knows anything about it. But many people, particularly those who have been interviewed, not to be named, sources, and so a lot of this stuff is not official, right? And also, the momentum officially from the United States as well in terms of strategy is that this binding bilateral compact includes minerals, right? Access to minerals in exchange for healthcare. In as much as there is no official, explicit thing saying minerals are part of this deal in that MOU, which the ambassador actually denies and calls disgusting in his farewell speech, the national strategy, the new national security strategy of the United States, the Agenda 2025, which from the Heritage Foundation, which heavily influenced Donald Trump's second term. The Heritage Foundation is an NGO type of lobby group in America that highly influences Republican leaders, and many of their policies, such as cutting off U.S. aid, has actually come into implementation. So you can draw a lot of tandems that don't make this unrealistic, right? It is not out of the... So I don't know if Gonzales perfectly aligns with his own State Department. He's a career diplomat, and he's served various administrations. So he's not like a Donald Trump placement, right? Where you have a political type of appointment. So that's the controversy, this mineral access type of thing. And then the idea that aid can be used as leverage for mineral access. But then also, on the other hand, how much is a copper mine? Copper mines have varying degrees, but surely $1 billion for long-term strategic mineral access does not really add up. $1 billion in aid for long-term strategic mineral access worth multiple billions of dollars. I don't know. I mean, not an economist or a mineral expert, but I don't think that's something that would align perfectly. That sounds like a steal, if that indeed was what the deal would amount to, which explains the hesitation. And now, when we go to the ambassador's speech, right, it's perhaps, when I hear the speech, it was a long speech, very impassionate speech. I think he's well known now.
Definitely pulling on those emotional strings. I would argue.
Yeah, he's not very diplomatic. He talks about how his daughter took her first steps in Zambia. So he has a, personal connection with Zambia, and it's stuck in his heart. He was in Zimbabwe previously also. But he's still a representative of the United States of America. Right, he's still representative of the national interests of the United States, and he obviously wanted to get this MOU deal signed, and it has not been signed, and he sees it as a positive thing, actually. So there's a lot of things that he mentioned. If we look at the speech, there's a lot of things that he mentioned that I think need some nuance and fact checking. All right, okay, because it's a highly politically charged thing. He said a lot of things about corruption, which have a lot of strong standing. The corruption perception index, maybe we can put a graph up there from the international transparency. I forgot the international transparency body that does the corruption perception index, CPI. Corruption has only marginally reduced the perception of corruption was only marginally reduced under the UPND government compared to the previous government. But many opposition and critics believe corruption is still endemic and it's heavily protected. He talked about officials in the ruling party not being pursued for corruption cases. And that's something that a lot of people believe also. It's a lopsided type of approach. There's some things that I think he probably overstepped. Talking about Bill 7, although he's talked about it in the frame of American investment, being afraid that if the constitution can change so easily vis-a-vis Bill 7, which is the expansion of parliament and so several other political changes, what does that mean for investor confidence and how easy laws can change? Although I don't know if it was necessary for him to talk about things like the domestic political affairs of Zambia, like changes like that, which I don't think would be tolerated by Zambia's in the United States, by Zambia's ambassador to the United States, for example.
Very true. I think we saw, and I'm saying we saw an ambassador from South Africa get kicked kicked out. So.
Absolutely. And in his speech, he does say he does insinuate that Washington was asked to replace him. Somewhere in his speech, he tucks it in somewhere. He doesn't necessarily say Zambia kicked him out, but he does say that Washington was asked to remove the ambassador to Zambia, which is himself. So that's interesting. I would be interested to see what the foreign ministry has to say about that. But there's some fact checks, let's say. So SEC Director General appointment, Daphne Pauline Soko Chabu, was appointed in early 2025. He says that she was under active ACC investigation at the time of appointment. There is no public records for this or court filings or credible media reports that can confirm this claim. So this could perhaps be limited to his own diplomatic privilege, perhaps, but publicly, that's not accessible. So diplomats sometimes could say things on intelligence or diplomatic briefings that are not open to public evidence. When it comes to ACC capacity and enforcement issues, the Anti-Corruption Commission of Zambia, being under-resourced, that's partially supported. Many people have talked about staffing constraints, limited investigative capacity, a low number of high-level prosecutions, and perceived selectivity in cases. Perceived selectivity doesn't necessarily mean they are wrong. It just means there is a lopsided approach to fighting corruption. People that can be arrested who are not affiliated with the government could also have legitimate cases of corruption. Doesn't necessarily mean they're being witch hunted. But the fact is, those who are in government and on good books of government are perhaps not being indicted in the same manner or prosecuted. So that has some credible support in terms of capacity. And I think there was a US embassy document or website that said around only 300 staff to tackle corruption across Zambia. So then theft of donor-funded medicines, programs like HIV, talked about theft of donor-funded medicines, programs like HIV, TB, malaria supply chains, PEPFAR supported, systemic diversion and resale through private pharmacies for what should be free Medicare, So there have been multiple investigations over years of leakage in public health supply chains, resale in private pharmacies. The United States last year actually cut $50 million. And that's where he got that reputation for being a very emotional diplomat. He cried publicly and he cut $50 million in health. And he talked about it in his speech. And he said it really hurt him. So he also talked about a disruption. Basically, we talked about when you have incidences like this, it disrupts the treatment access, free healthcare access to, at least for HIV and AIDS, 1.3 million people on treatment. And I think I read something on New York Times that said the health official in Zambia's Ministry of Health talked about 100,000 people whose treatment has been directly impacted by. But that one is actually not to do with the corruption. That one's actually to do with the downsizing of healthcare, or people say redesigning or restructuring, but it's more downsizing because there's less funds than there were before. So about 100,000 people have been affected. So, and I think that's another aspect. You also have to look at what's happening in the United States versus what's happening in Zambia. There's a lot of other things I can fact check, like reports with no action patterns. That's obviously interpretive, but a bit more grounded. Things like commissions reports and task forces that are just done rhetorically and nothing is really done. There is some evidence of that slow momentum of government. But then one thing that's also interesting is the Sino Metals, the Chinese spillage in the Kafue River, which happened in February 2025. He mentioned it and he talked about how, and this needs fact checking because this is highly politically charged and feeds into this whole power grab type of rivalry between China and the United States. 50,000 oil tons spill, just a briefer on what happened. 50,000 tons spill of toxic mining waste, heavy metals, acidic sludge, into tributaries feeding the Kafue River, affecting millions and millions of people, which is very critical for agriculture, fisheries, and urban supply. What happened was basically there was an independent South African firm called the Drizzt Environmental Report that released 395-page report and found that at least 1.5 million tons was spilled, 30 times higher than initially reported, and extensive contamination, ecological risks, health risks, cancer, which he mentioned. So the ambassador said there was a 500-page report released. The publicly available report is 385 pages. He says that the minister, a very high-ranking official in Zambia's government, denied that the report existed. That minister can most closely be traced to Cornelius Motwa, who was the Minister of Information, who didn't necessarily deny that a report existed, but he actually said that it was not as harmful as it was when actually it was. So the exact 500-page figure is might be a different report. That's an internal government report that we are not privy to as well. As of course he's a diplomat, so there's things that he knows that we do not know. But at the same time, how can we guarantee that it exists? Because diplomats can also say things that aren't true to feed their own. I'm not saying that he's lying, but what I'm saying is there's no certainty of the existence of that publicly. Right?
Yeah.
So it's purely based on his own privilege and his own access. So the degree of denial is there. It is, it could be perhaps considered interpretive rather than fully reflective. So it's more downplaying the effects rather than refusing the existence of harmful effects. So previous ACC crisis, there was also a crisis in the Anti-Corruption Commission and the Director General, a dissolution of the entire board in 2024. So that might reinforce a narrative of institutional instability in the fight against corruption, which feeds into what you were saying. But a general assessment of his speech, he does talk about donor aid diversion, which exists. Yes, it's strongly supported.
I think he even brought up Dambisa Moyo as well.
Yeah, I talked about Dambisa Moyo. Obviously, that will pull on the emotional strings of Zambians because she is a daughter of Zambia. Structural weakness in accountability systems, that is well documented. What is partially supported and considered interpretive could be intentional weakening of ACC, because he says due to the fact that the ACC boss was under investigation and got instructions that you should not prosecute top people. That is interpretive of the lack of persecution of government-aligned people. Yeah, that is his interpretation. Government denial, minimization of environmental report, that is also partially supported / an interpretation. Government has downsized the extensive impact of the spillage. And then the report itself, we cannot find it. So no action after reports framing is very difficult to see. But of course, the sentiments play on real things that have happened, right? So it's not necessarily a lie. It's more your understanding of how events have unfolded. But what I think is also a serious thing here, and I think in Zambia we have a history of believing diplomats, particularly from
the US. From the US, especially Western nations. Very, very true.
Yeah, you're in opposition, you often want to believe the diplomat, whatever the diplomat says. If you're in the ruling party, you often be more likely to push back against the diplomat. But it's
funnily
important
enough,
to
the UPND also used that strategy quite heavily.
Opposition is always accused of siding with Western diplomats. And I think an important thing also is, Anthony Blinken spoke extensively about how America behaves at home is important to how America behaves externally. It's talking about things like Bill 7 and the rule of law, and saying the rule of law is hollow in Zambia. It's very difficult to see the genuineness from a person representing the United States. I'm sure as a human being, he has a close heart with Zambia, but he's representing the Donald Trump administration, right? With faceless ICE agents on the streets, some of whom have pursued people that have ended up dying. You have,
a country that's literally, as from reports, is responsible for bombing a school.
Let's not even talk about the foreign. I'm just limiting it to the domestic aspect, right? You have a situation of an extension of the White House based on funding from associates and billionaires, and you can't call that a problematic thing. The very one of the most important pillars of the United States system of power, the White House, is being expanded by people associated with the ruling president.
Yeah.
How would that be perceived in Zambia if that happened in Zambia? If they said they got donations from 3 billionaires to expand State House. And it just happens to be that those billionaires happen to get a lot of interesting, lucrative contracts. That would be perceived as corruption in Zambia. I know that for sure. Giving a president a 747 as a gift. I think, George Bush, you can hate on George Bush, but there was a report that one of the presidents from Central Asia or Eastern Europe, or the Balkans, somewhere around there, I think it's Armenia or Bulgaria, I forgot which country. We can fact check that. He got a puppy and he gave away the puppy because it was considered a gift and influence. But 747, no problem.
That's nothing.
So, it's important to, I think, because, you are funding a country. Zambia is a small country. It's a poor country. There's some sort of level of entitlement to talk about a lot of things without also acknowledging that there's serious issues going on in your country, and it will affect the perception. And I'm not saying this just as like a pushback or anything.
I hope people are getting the point here. I don't think what you're doing is like whataboutism, like in the sense of like, Zambia's government is corrupt, and what about your government? Like, I don't think that's what Zenge is touching on. But I think it's possible to say both things. You can chew gum and walk at the same time, right? You can say yes, the Zambian government does have a lot of issues with regards to accountability and how U.S. taxpayer money is basically where it's going, but at the same time also claim, hey, your house is not as, your finger wagging. Also, we can play the same game as well. If that's where it's going. I think for me, what was lacking.
And there's even a new Voting Rights Act that has been changed a few days ago in the United States.
Yeah, I just saw that, but I think for me, what I wasn't hearing. What I wasn't hearing from the ambassador was regards to especially this issue with regards to the pathogen clause. The reason why people are rejecting it. I don't think he really even touched on it, using this whole thing of, leverage for critical, for critical minerals. I think that's something that was like, me personally, as a Zambian, I don't think I feel comfortable with a country that, or a administration that regards my country as, I'm sorry for using crass words, but I'm quoting him directly, shithole countries. And you have my data. I don't know how comfortable, and excuse the listeners for the crass language there, but that's something that the United States president has said. So I think those are issues. I think the United States right now is dealing with a situation where they're losing a lot of geopolitical friends, if I can say that. And of course, again, I'm not saying that the accountability issues really need to be dealt with, and I definitely applaud the ambassador for touching on those things. But I think there needs to be a little bit more care and a little bit more caution, considering, you know, a lot of people are now saying that, you know, Africa is moving more towards, you know, we're seeing countries, Zambia as an example, of accepting one payments, and now there are questions with regards to, you know, the petrodollar system. So these are all issues that I think, you know, the United States needs to at least take into consideration before, you know, going ham on that speech.
Yeah. And there was those pictures of the governor of the Bank of Zambia who was there, and he was not looking happy. Yeah.
I can imagine.
I was watching the speech, and I was like, is there any government official here? This guy must be livid. You know?
Yeah, good question. Because I think in the background I was just hearing people going, yeah, and people,
yeah,
you know,
there's clearly people that weren't very pleased. But there were some people that were very excited because he sounded like what critics of the government have been saying a lot. Not to say all of it is perfectly true, but some of the claims, as I mentioned before, you know, pilfering of medicines is a grave crime. You know, I have accounts of people that I know where, you know, a child is sick and then they just watch the child. He's in government public hospitals. Just watch the child until you can pay for a certain item for your child to, you know, people will die. You know, it's a grave crime. And I the Minister of Health was changed. Actually, he says there's no accountability, but perhaps I assume the political type of accountability is just removing one health minister and putting another one. No health minister has been arrested, or no high-ranking person in the health ministry has been arrested. But the government is trying to look like changing. Things are changing. The new health minister came a few months ago. Yeah. So it's very unfortunate. But also the question should come, can Zambia afford to fund its own health?
I am an African.